see what I'm trying to show you. I'm hoping everyone can see that okay. It looks okay on my screen. So I'm assuming everything's fine until someone says otherwise. Um, as well as that, I should put on the timer. Anyway, thanks everyone for having me today. I'm Joe. I'm a fifth year iGGi student well, I'm here at York at the moment in my bedroom. Similarly to Charlie and Christiana, I am here to talk about supporting learning in multiplayer games. Before I start, I just want to say that this is a 15-minute version of a 30-minute talk I'll be giving at Develop this year. And so two things. One, I've cut off a lot of content, and so I've tried to really streamline it. So if some things are a bit unclear, that's my fault for cutting it out. But two, also, because it's for Develop, this is aimed at designers and developers, really. So I don't go into methodology too much. I don't talk too much about how I built this. In fact, it's not even an outcome of my PhD. It's just something that I've done in my spare time because I've been really fascinated by it. So we'll dive into it first by thinking about, what am I here to talk about? Well, I'm here to talk about how to help supporting learning in multiplayer games. I will have a brief discussion over the who and what, because these are important for framing how you then provide help to them. And most of this, it's actually no, about 50-50. 50 of it's informed by my own research and my own steeping into literature for the past 4.5 years at this point, both kind of learning of esport games and kind of learning of games in general, and a little bit of psychology. And also by examples, I play a lot of games, especially shooter games. You might see a lot of shooter examples here. But I've generally been fascinated by how these games help teach people how to play and trying to learn how best to do it. So first thing I want to get onto is the who. So who is learning about your games? And this is mainly underpinned, what I bring forward is mainly underpinned by this idea of literacy. Literacy is something that I first read, at least anyway, from What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy by James Paul Gee. I definitely recommend it to anyone. It's really accessible, easy to read, and really fascinating. I'm not going to go into too much of like the implications of it, but basically, in the same way that we are literate in languages, we are literate in the language of games. And the most common example people usually provide is the red barrel. Okay, so some of you may already be seeing these red barrels and there are light bulbs going off in your head. You know exactly what these are for or what these are coded as. And that really depends on your experiences. So if you have played lots of shooters, whether they're first person, third person, or any other kind, you would have an idea of, okay, I've seen a red barrel there. That is an explosive that deals damage to people within a certain area. Let's say if you played purely strategy games or games where this isn't that common, then you will maybe potentially just see it as part of the environment. You'll have coded that the things that you care about are the characters existing in the environment rather than the environment itself. And if you're completely new to games and don't know anything, depending on how that barrel is colored and coded, you might be fascinated by it, or you might be fascinated by this static TV screen off in the corner. So this level of literacy, kind of, some people might call it expertise, but literacy is kind of what I go with here. And I kind of want to show this. This is the kind of framework I'll be showing at the end. But at the top, you have kind of the spectrum of kind of people who are complete games novices, people who are who have played a lot of games and then are quite new to the genre of game that you might be developing, and then genre veterans who will play similar previous games. So let's say you're making a MOBA, these will be people who've played Dota or League of Legends. So then we go on to the what, which is, what are the things that people are learning? And I'm just going to flash this up very quickly, and I won't go into too much detail just because I don't really have the time. But the what is split into the in-game skills and out-of-game skills. The in-game skills are the really important bit and the part I will focus on completely, to be honest. The out-of-game skills I just want to raise as kind of points of thinking about. But in-game skills, these are things that you do in-game to master and win in games. So the first thing is people remember is usually controls. And so that's the physical inputs you put into a controller, like a keyboard, a mouse, or a controller, and how they relate to in-game actions. Then you have the mechanics. This is kind of more broadly the game logic. So this includes things like the win conditions, game objects, object interaction rules, the game rules. that's kind of how the game plays out when you interact with it. Then you have motor skills. I'm hoping this is relatively obvious, but if not, these are kind of the fine movements you make in the real world to affect better movements in games. So this is things like aiming, movement. I think those are kind of the main two. Beyond that, then we then get to what is game sense, which is a very common term you see in games and game people talking about games, but not in academic literature. So I'm just going to steal it. Basically, it's about situational awareness, being able to take in the right amount of information about the environment, model what's happening in the environment, and being able to predict what's happening next. And this is including how other players are going to act and react and respond. And then finally, we have this big airy term, the meta. Meta is quite hard to define, but it's basically the kind of common practices or strategies or builds that are seen as successful at the moment. And this can change over time. So different builds change and different strategies kind of overcome other ones. And especially if you have a game that's evolving and you're fiddling with some of the variables to make it more fair, then the meta changes as well. And then you have briefly out of game skills. These are things that are to do with how you interact with the community and ingratiate yourself into the community. So these are practices which are like the accepted and unaccepted behaviors that players see from others. You have language, which is kind of the grammar and vocabulary that comes out of from playing with people. So this includes things like callouts. So like smoke banana may not mean a lot to most people here, but in Counter-Strike, it has a very specific meaning, and it's something that people have to learn. And then from my research with talking with people who play games, meta learning was something that came up, especially for more advanced players. They would be looking at how they were learning and how they were mastering a game, and then trying to improve on that. And then finally, leading on to that is tools. And this is, I had some people who would make scripts in certain games so that they could test out certain things. And so people gain mastery in tools either within the game or outside of the game to help them learn and be better, basically. And they're in very discrete segments, but it's a bit of a mess, but it's hopefully good to just kind of visualize where these kind of generally come about in terms of who needs to learn what. Now we get on to the chunk of what I want to talk about, which is the how. And the way that kind of I've come up together with this and put it in a framework was thinking about, what roles do developers and designers take when teaching someone how to play a game. And I came up with 5 different roles, and I decided to use a kind of a role naming system for it. So the first one I have is the instructor. And the instructor is basically someone who's telling the player, okay, this is how you do this is how you do that, this is what you should do here. It's very explicit, maybe giving players a chance to do it, but then just checking that they can do it. And the most kind of biggest example, and especially when you think about learning of games, the thing that comes up the most is the tutorial. I have a screenshot here of Insurgency Sandstorm, and it's saying, hey, press control to crouch to go through here. This is part of a bigger scripted single player section of gameplay where you learn how to shoot, to strafe, to interact with objects, to use grenades. Exactly. Just telling you exactly kind of how to do things. And it's in each of these, I tell you kind of what they're usually good for. And for this one, the controls, mechanics, and even practicing and learning motor skills is very useful for. The next example I bring up for a tutor, an instructor even, are interactive guides. And so here I have Dota as an example, Dota 2. This is a guide. And what it's doing is it's structuring the items and the actions you can do in game to inform you what you should do when. And this is really, really helpful, especially for mechanics and then learning how to model the environment and what to do, and also like what you could adjust these so that the meta changes with them. And it's interactive guides are basically just structuring information in general. So how you structure your heroes on a page also helps players choose who to use and what their role is. So then we go on to the next role, which I give as the messenger. And this isn't so much you're communicating, but this is you're facilitating communication between players. and even structuring it so that you can have players look more towards the learning side of things. So, for example, we have what I would call a restricted chat, which is where audio and textual information is relayed, but they're relayed through pre-written messages either by developers or players. And this is very good for helping with game sense. You can point out what people are doing and when. If you look over time, you can think about what people in similar situations are doing by figuring out the meta. One thing about this is that these messages can be very easily appropriated. Whenever you missed a shot or did something bad in Rocket League, people would spam "nice shot" because they were using it sarcastically. So there's that to take into consideration as well. The other kind of more restricted way that you can facilitate communication is through a ping system, which are visual indicators placed in the world or on the map to convey information between players. And this is kind of good for mechanics if you can outline what someone's pointing out to you. I guess if you say someone is say Roshan is about to spawn, then you understand that that's important. I have a screenshot here of Rainbow Six Siege where these are contextual pings, and that wherever you ping, it will change what comes up on the ping. And I've, through my research, found that this was a useful tool for people to help teach others because they didn't interrupt text or voice chat with information rather than just conveying it through pings. The next one here is the kind of creator and sharer. And this is kind of linking back to what Charlie was talking about earlier in terms of Twitch streaming, but more focused on content for learning. And through my own research, I found that the vast majority of people will utilize videos or streams to learn how to play or learn how to improve. So this is a very important part of it that I think, personally, I think could be better leveraged to the community, basically. Explain. So you have kind of tutorial videos and streams. These are the obvious ones. Here I have a tutorial video for Vermintide 2, where they're telling you how to play the game from the start. And these are generally quite good, mainly for being able to learn about the mechanics, how people act and react, and how they expect you to act and react, as well as what's common and what's popular with the meta. And videos are really good for teaching the meta as well, because they're less costly to make than, say, trying to build an interactive guide or a tutorial for meta. And you don't need too much. You just kind of need the equipment to make a video. And one way that would be really good to see this in games more often is being able to having people or having games recommend what streams or what videos they should watch. So what content creators are really good and really helpful for players. Another way is through match replay data. So I don't know if people know, but in Counter-Strike and Dota, you can, and in some other games as well, more games are doing it, you can get a replay of the entire match from any perspective. And this is massively useful for kind of game sense and meta learning, because you get to see what other players who might be more knowledgeable than you are doing and be able to kind of adjust your mental models and figure out, okay, this is what they're doing, this is how I need to improve. This is more in a competitive setting, really, rather than a cooperative setting. And then finally, I have the provider, which is providing environments for players to set up their own game modes and practice spaces. So one thing that I found a lot was that people would use casual game modes a lot to try and learn how to play. Now, for this one, Team SWAT is for this game, Splitgate is a headshots only kill. And this allows players to be like, right, I'm going to focus on killing with headshots and getting headshots. And then Showdown is what's called a gun race, where you get to use every gun after getting so many kills with each gun. And so that allows people to, get used to each gun. And then there are practice maps as well that allow you to practice very specific things. Here in Valorant, I can practice, say, the weapon spray of this weapon and try and control it, because that's a skill in itself. And it's also actually really good for newer players to be able to have these spaces and safe spaces to practice controls and mechanics and their motor skills, because they don't just learn how a control works and figure it out. They need to really acclimatize and accustom themselves to it. So the last one is the coach. And I've not really seen any examples of this, but this is a kind of overarching thing that uses all the different roles we've spoken about before, and it provides contextual recommendations to players based on how well they're doing or maybe not doing, and says, hey, here's this. For example, I mocked this up for Hunt Showdown. Hey, here's this trial you can do to practice this skill. Let's go, and why don't you have a go at that? That'll be cool. um, and yeah, and what comes out is this kind of layered system. Like I said, it's very in discrete boxes, but that's kind of more to make it less messy. Things kind of meld over. Motor skills are something that pros always master in practice. But like the meta is something that isn't really important to game novices. So these are kind of hopefully giving you ideas of like, oh, okay, this is how I want to teach this, and this is how I could teach this. But yeah, that's all the time I have. That's all I have time for. Sorry if it was a bit rushed, but if you want to watch the full thing, I'll be uploading it after develop. And yeah, and I'll be finishing my PhD in March 2022. So I'm looking for any jobs or consultancy looking at like game learning and accessibility. Thank you.